Hello, my name is Catherine Whitney and I'm the Director of the Teachers Retirement System of Louisiana. I'm so pleased that you're joining us for a presentation on Constitutional Amendment number 3. Let's get started. Constitutional Amendment number 3 proposes to make a one-time payment to the TRSL unfunded accrued liability as a way to fund permanent pay raises for K-12 teachers and support staff. At the polls, voters will see the ballot language on this slide. Statewide election date is Saturday, May 16th, and early voting dates are Saturday, May 2nd through Saturday, May 9th. Before we dive into the constitutional amendment, let's talk about TRSL. As you all know, TRSL is a defined benefit retirement plan. With the DB plan, TRSL members have a guaranteed lifetime benefit that is calculated using a formula set in state law. This formula looks at years of service times final average compensation times a benefit factor, which is typically 2.5%. TRSL is not a 401k. TRSL benefits are not determined by the amount of contributions made to a retirement account or the balance in an account, as we see with defined contribution retirement plans. So how are these benefits funded? The TRSL retirement plan is funded from 3 sources: employee contributions, employer contributions, and investment earnings. TRSL invests employee and employer contributions and its current assets, and retirement benefits are paid from TRSL investment earnings. Most employees, as you know, contribute 8% of every paycheck toward their retirements. This rate is set forth in state law. Employers contribute a percentage of payroll for each employee for this purpose as well. So let's take a look at the employer contribution. The employer contribution is calculated annually and is made up of 4 parts. You're familiar with receiving the upcoming rates in December of every year. The 4 components include the cost of funding the accruing benefit for all active employees. This is often referred to as the normal cost. Second part is the shared payment of the unfunded accrued liability. The third is the percentage rate to fund cost of living increases. And finally, the non-investment related administrative expenses of the system, effectively the funds that are for TRSL's operating budget. The part of the contribution that would be impacted by the constitutional amendment is the shared UAL percentage. That's why you see it in the red box. This is the only part of the contribution rate that would be impacted by the amendment. So let's put numbers to these parts. This chart focuses on the fiscal year 26-27 projected rate and looks at K-12. If we break down the 4 parts, the employer normal costs, and that again, that is what the employer is paying for the accruing benefit. Each employee's accruing benefit, this is the number that's added to the employee's 8% that they are contributing. It's 3.64% of pay. Again, we're focused on K-12. The higher ed normal cost is a bit lower. It's 3.39% of pay. The TRSL admin expense, that's for TRSL's operating budget, is 0.35% of pay. The shared UAL in red, the percentage that goes to the pay down of that debt, is 13.12%. The retiree COLA percentage is 2%, and that leads us to the total employer contribution rate of 19.11%. Again, this is K-12. Higher ed's a bit lower because of that lower normal cost. Their total employer contribution rate projected for fiscal year 27 is 18.86%. The shared UAL percentage at 13.12% is the same for K-12 and higher ed. So let's discuss the UAL. The UAL is debt owed by the state of Louisiana to TRSL. A portion of the UAL exists because TRSL was underfunded from its beginning in 1936, 90 years ago. That underfunding continued until the late 1980s. But since the late 1980s, and this was also the product of a constitutional amendment at the time, the system has been actuarially funded. meaning its funding needs are based on what is needed today to pay for benefits in the future. TRSL's actuary determines funding needs based on the system's past experience, as well as assumptions about future events. Some examples of future events would be investment performance and salary increases. All of these components are focused on ensuring sufficient funds are available to pay future benefits. Each year, the system can exceed or fall short of its actuarial assumptions, resulting in an increase or decrease in the UAL. As of June 30th, 2025, and that is when our last valuation was conducted at the end of the fiscal year, the total UAL balance was $7.1 billion. I must also note, as many of you are familiar with, significant pension reforms that began in 2009 have made great strides in reducing the UAL. Now let's look at who pays the UAL. The state has chosen to pay the UAL through employer contributions to TRSL as a percentage of payroll. Remember the chart we just reviewed, that shared UAL percentage is 13.12% of pay, and we'll look at that chart again in a minute. These employer payments are made according to a payment plan, or otherwise referred to as debt schedules, based on when the debt was created. So think about it like a mortgage. Each mortgage has a term, and you're making payments on that mortgage until the end of the term and the mortgage is paid off. All employers that participate in TRSL shared in the payment of this debt. As mentioned earlier, the shared payment to the UAL is only one component of the annual employer contribution rate, and the total employer contribution is paid as a percentage of payroll. So now that we've covered the UAL basics, let's jump into the constitutional amendment. Constitutional Amendment number 3 proposes to use money in 3 education trust funds to erase a portion of the UAL. The 3 trust funds are constitutionally protected and have approximately $2.3 billion in them. They are the Education Excellence Fund, Louisiana Education Quality Trust Fund, and the Louisiana Quality Education Support Fund. And Support Fund is basically the fund where investment earnings of the primary trust fund are deposited and from which appropriations come. The money in these trust funds supports certain educational programs in both K-12 and higher ed. So if the amendment passes, the one-time payment to the UAL would lower employer UAL payments and create savings for employers. So it does so by paying off schedules or making payments to schedules that either eliminate or reduce future payments. The amendment further provides that K-12 employers will be required to use savings from the reduced contributions to fund permanent salary increases for certificated and non-certificated personnel, and you see the amounts on this slide. These raises would start July 1st of 2026, which is for the fiscal year 2027. So let's look at these numbers again. You see the employer normal cost, the shared UAL percentage, the total employer contribution rate. These are, again, the current projected rates for fiscal year 27 as we stand today before the constitutional amendment. If the constitutional amendment passes, you'll see what happens to the rate and how it changes. Again, this is based upon a UAL payment of $2.3 billion, which is what the trust funds currently hold. You see that red column, that shared UAL will drop from that 13.12% to 8.09%. That's a 5.03% decrease in the rate. The total employer contribution rate as a result would drop to 14.08% in fiscal year 27 for K-12 employers. Again, the higher ed rate, because it's a little lower, that total contribution rate would drop to 13.38%. So now let's take a look at dollars related to these rate reductions. So what you see on the top 2 boxes, for the first on the left is fiscal year 27 savings. So if the rate drops, the total savings for fiscal year 27 for K-12 education would be $225 million. Essentially, each district would have a component of those savings based upon their payroll. These are the savings that would be used to fund the permanent pay raises. So these savings would be offset by the permanent pay raise cost. We also wanted to look at the impact of longer-term savings if we extended out through the life of the debt schedules that would be impacted by this one-time payment to the UAL. So we looked through fiscal year 2040 because that is the lifespan. The total savings for K-12 through fiscal year 2040, these are contributions that would not have to be made to the retirement system, is $2.5 billion. So now let's turn to higher ed, which is the bottom box on your left. The higher ed savings for fiscal year 27 would be $81 million. The long-term savings for higher ed through, again, fiscal year 2040 would be $928 million. In the final box in green, we also show you the long-term interest savings. So on these debt schedules, interest accrues at the rate of return that the system assumes it will earn. So the long-term interest savings would be $1.1 billion. And those savings, again, are through fiscal year 2040 and apply to both K-12 and higher ed. So let's talk a little more about employer impact. So if Constitutional Amendment number 3 passes, the analysis will be performed to determine savings and as it relates to the cost of the raises and with those results, the legislature is constitutionally required to provide funding to cover costs of pay raises for any K-12 employer that does not have sufficient savings to cover the cost. For those employers that have sufficient and then excess savings, essentially their savings exceed the cost of the raises, the law sets out certain ways in which those excess funds can be used. We've identified them here on this slide to cover a few of them: staffing in certain critical shortage areas, early childhood education, technology, to give you a sense of the types of programs that the excess can be used on. The law also states that the permanent pay increase cannot replace or offset any salary increases or supplements already in place. And again, this slide primarily focuses on K-12. A note at the bottom, Constitutional Amendment 3 does not include a mandate for the use of savings by higher education. A couple more notes on the Constitutional Amendment. The legislature must also provide funding to cover cost of pay increases at non-TRSL participating charter schools, and also passed last year is the Early Childhood Education Stability Fund, which establishes an $11 million annual appropriation beginning July 1st, 2026 for early childhood education programs and initiatives. This fund is contingent upon the passage of the constitutional amendment. So in summary, if Constitutional Amendment 3 passes, funds in 3 education trust funds will be used to pay down the UAL and increase TRSL's assets. Early payment to this UAL will reduce annual payments for employers and create savings. K-12 employers must use savings to fund permanent certificated and non-certificated pay increases. Remember, there are no mandates for higher ed's use of the savings. And the legislature must provide funding to cover the cost of pay increases for any K-12 employer that does not have sufficient savings to cover the cost. Again, these raises would start July 1st, 2026. So how is this going to play out between May 18th and July 1st if the constitutional amendment passes? We've given you a timeline of what we're projecting tentatively will occur. So if the amendment passes, Treasury Department would liquidate these trust funds and notify TRSL of the amount. TRSL's actuary, the week of May 25th, would determine the updated employer contribution rate. The TRSL board would have to approve this updated rate, as would the Public Retirement Systems Actuarial Committee. As soon as TRSL has the updated rate, it would provide it to the Department of Education, who will perform the calculations and inform the legislature of any funds needing to be appropriated. Once PERSAC approves the updated employer contribution rate, we will notify you as employers. This will be an update to the rate that you would have received in December for fiscal year 27. The legislative session also ends the week of June 1st, so any appropriations that would be necessary would occur before the end of the session. And then the permanent pay raises become effective, of course, in the 26-27 school year. I hope this presentation has helped with your understanding of Constitutional Amendment number 3 and how it would affect TRSL.